If you can play Chopin's Nocturne in C minor, I'll marry you on the spot. Morgan Pierce didn't even glance up from her phone when she said it, her heels striking the marble lobby of Orion Records like a gavel. The janitor froze mid-polish, crouched beside the grand piano, and looked at her with eyes that carried more stories than words ever could. She thought it was just a joke until she saw the way his hand lingered on the bench. Stay with me until the very end, and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from, so I can see just how far this story travels. The lobby of Orion Records was a cathedral of glass and steel, cold perfect, echoing every sound like it wanted to memorize it. Late at night, it felt like a place no one owned, not even the woman who ran it. Morgan Pierce strode in phone in one hand, espresso in the other. She barely noticed the janitor kneeling beside the grand piano, his broad shoulders hunched as he polished its legs like he was tending to something sacred. The instrument gleamed under the pendant lights, a relic in a world that preferred streaming numbers to real music. Without looking up, she tossed out the words like they meant nothing. If you can play Chopin's Nocturne in C minor, I'll marry you on the spot. Her heels clicked toward the elevator, and for a moment there was only the soft swish of cloth against wood. Then she heard it, his voice low and steady. I heard you, he said. But that's not a piece you play because someone dares you. That made her stop. Slowly she turned. The janitor's eyes were an odd gray-green steady, but unreadable. He didn't move except to fold the cleaning cloth in his palm, each corner aligned with the precision of a soldier folding a flag. So you do know it, she said, eyebrow lifting. He didn't answer, just returned to polishing the quiet between them, stretching until it felt deliberate. Morgan let out a dry little laugh, the kind she used in boardrooms when someone underestimated her. Didn't think so. She didn't understand why she said it. Maybe it was the silence or the absurd romance of that piano gleaming in an empty lobby. Maybe it was the way he looked at the instrument not as office decor, but as if it remembered him. The elevator doors slid open and she stepped inside without looking back. Hours later, when the last badge swipe had cleared the building, Daniel Cross sat on the bench. His fingers hovered over the keys, not pressing, just resting like they were waiting for permission. He closed his eyes. No music came, only the kind of silence that had shape weight and memory. The next morning, Morgan was halfway through her coffee when she caught herself staring across the glass wall of her office at the piano in the lobby. A faint smudge barely there caught the light. She remembered the way his hand had rested there, the stillness in his eyes. Jennifer, she said, cutting her assistant off mid-sentence. Who's the overnight janitor, Daniel Cross? Started 6 months ago, third shift. Why Morgan didn't answer. She just glanced back at the piano and pretended it didn't matter. That night she worked late. The building had that rare kind of quiet you could feel in your bones. Drawn downstairs without knowing why she found him again, kneeling at the piano, polishing the brass pedals. I owe you an apology, she said, stepping closer. He didn't look up. For what? For being condescending. That Chopin comment. His hands slowed. Most people wouldn't remember. I remember everything she said softly. Daniel straightened, meeting her eyes. Then remember, this Chopin isn't a party trick. It's a prayer. Something in her chest tightened, though she didn't know why. She tilted her head. You speak like someone who's played him. I've played a lot of things, he replied. Doesn't mean I still do. Why not? He hesitated, cloth still in his hand. Because some things stop belonging to you when you stop needing them to survive. Morgan didn't know it yet, but those words were going to follow her for a very, very long time. Morgan told herself it was nothing, just a late-night conversation with a man who knew too much about Chopin to be scrubbing brass pedals for a living. But the words he'd left her with, some things stop belonging to you when you stop needing them to survive, slid under her skin and stayed there like a splinter she couldn't quite reach. 2 days later, she found herself in the lobby again, long after most of the building had gone dark. The security guard raised an eyebrow when she passed. Working late again, he asked. She muttered something about deadlines and kept walking, but the truth was, she wasn't sure why she was there. The piano sat in its usual place, gleaming under the pendant lights. She slowed her steps, scanning for him. No janitor cart, no steady rhythm of cloth over wood. The silence felt heavier without him in it. She lingered a moment, then went upstairs, annoyed at herself for caring. The following night, she stayed later than usual, not because she needed to finish contracts, but because the building's emptiness had started to feel expectant. Around midnight, she headed down to the lobby again, telling herself she was only passing through. This time, he was there. Daniel knelt on the marble floor, polishing the piano's legs with a small, deliberate movement, his head bent as if in prayer. She hesitated, then walked toward him. "You weren't here last night," she said. He looked up briefly. "Had to cover another floor." The conversation should have ended there, but instead she found herself asking, "How long have you been doing this janitorial work?" "Yes, about 8 years." He didn't sound ashamed. If anything, he spoke with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer explained himself. "That's a long time to be doing something you don't care about," she said. Daniel's mouth curved in something between a smile and a smirk. "You think you can tell what I care about? I think I can tell when someone's meant for more than this," she replied, her voice low, almost offensive. He set the cloth aside, leaned back on his heels, and studied her. "Maybe more looks different from where I'm standing." There was no challenge in his tone, no bitterness, just truth. It disarmed her in a way boardroom arguments never could. Morgan crossed her arms, unwilling to be the one to look away first. "I saw you leave something on the piano the other night," she said finally. A flicker passed over his face, gone as quickly as it came. "Did you 4 bars?" she said. "Handwritten." It stopped mid-phrase. "Most things do," he murmured. She stepped closer, tilting her head. "You wrote it, and if I did, then I want to hear the rest." He shook his head slowly. "It's not finished. Maybe it's waiting for someone to finish it with you," she offered. His eyes held hers for a moment like he was measuring the weight of her words. Then without answering, he picked up the cloth again and resumed his work as if the conversation had never happened. The next morning, she couldn't stop thinking about that half-written melody. She had meetings stacked back to back, a marketing crisis on the West Coast, and yet her mind kept drifting to a folded page of notes abandoned on a music stand. By early evening, she found herself pulling up old concert archives on her laptop. Names and dates scrolled past until one photo made her stop. It was grainy, taken from the back of a small concert hall. A young man sat at a grand piano posture, straight hands poised over the keys. The caption read, "E. Cross Finalist, St. George Classical Showcase, 2005. Considered a rising star. Disappeared from the circuit in 2009. Her coffee went cold. That night she waited until the building was empty before finding him in the break room rinsing out a rag. "You're not just a janitor," she said from the doorway. He didn't look up. "And you're not just a CEO. I spent 3 hours digging through concert archives," she continued. "You were supposed to be the next big thing, then you vanished." He dried his hands, slowly set the rag on the counter, and finally met her gaze. "You've done your homework. I don't like mysteries in my building," she said. "I'm not a mystery," he replied. "I'm just a man doing his job." "No," she said, stepping closer. "You're a man hiding, and I want to know why." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he leaned against the counter, arms crossed loosely, as if deciding whether she could handle the truth. "You ever lose everything that made sense to you in one moment?" Morgan didn't answer. "You train your whole life to master something." He continued. "You breathe it, sleep it, bleed for it. Then one day it stops being enough, not because you're not good, but because life hands you a new sheet of music and says, 'Play this instead.'" "What was the moment?" she asked. His voice softened. "My wife. Cancer. She passed in the spring of 2009. Our daughter was 2. Morgan felt her throat tighten. "I couldn't tour with a toddler, couldn't teach master classes and still be there when she woke up coughing in the night. I had to choose." "And you chose her," she said quietly. Every time he replied. The silence that followed was not empty, it was weighted with something sacred. "I don't know if I'd be strong enough to do that," Morgan admitted. "You'd be surprised what you're capable of when someone small needs you to survive," he said. She studied him for a long moment. "So you gave it all up?" "I gave up the stage," he said, "not the music." "Where is it now?" His eyes flickered to her, then away. "Mostly quiet. Sometimes it wakes up when she laughs, or when she sleeps. But I don't play anymore." "Why not?" "Because when I sit at the keys, now," he said, "I hear everything I've lost." Morgan stepped closer, her voice steady. You're wrong. You don't hear what you've lost. You hear who you've loved. That's not the same thing. For the first time, something in his expression shifted, not enough to call it a smile, but enough to suggest the ice had cracked. Neither of them noticed how long they stood there in the quiet. The hum of the refrigerator, the only sound between them, until Morgan finally said, "Play it for someone who doesn't know who you are." Maybe that's what we're both missing. Daniel didn't answer, but his eyes held hers in a way that told her he'd heard every word. Morgan couldn't explain why she kept thinking about his words. They had a way of following her, slipping between her thoughts during meetings, echoing when she was alone in the elevator, rising up at night when the city was quiet. You hear who you've loved. It was dangerous how that line could make her feel something she wasn't ready to name. A week passed before the next collision between them. She'd been buried in prep for the upcoming Orion Records Gala, a night of champagne schmoozing and a high-profile performance from a Berlin Philharmonic pianist. The event was meant to be flawless. Then 3 hours before the curtain rose, her phone rang. The pianist had been in a car accident, minor injuries but enough to send him to the hospital. Her event team scrambled for a replacement, calling every agent they knew. The best they could manage on such short notice was a local performer who couldn't arrive until midway through the evening. The board members were already panicking when someone joked, "Didn't you used to play, Morgan? Just do the opening piece yourself." They expected her to laugh it off. Instead, she smiled tightly and said, "I'll handle it." Now standing backstage with the Steinway under a halo of light, she realized just how reckless that had been. She hadn't touched a piano in 18 years. 4 hours in a practice room earlier that afternoon had done nothing but remind her how stiff her fingers felt, how uneven her tempo was. But pride is a stubborn thing. It will let you burn rather than bow. She made it through the piece barely. The applause was polite but not warm. She could feel the confusion ripple through the room. Why is she up there? Is she all right? By the time she left the stage, her hands were trembling. She didn't want anyone's pity, so she slipped out a side exit, letting the cold night air cut through her gown like a blade. The staff parking lot was mostly empty, the only sounds the hum of idling vans and the faint thump of music from inside. Then she heard something else, soft, deliberate, fragile as moonlight on water. A piano. The same piece she had just played, but now it breathed. Each note was a heartbeat. Each pause was its own kind of prayer. She followed it to a dimly lit storage bay behind the loading dock. A battered upright piano sat there, clearly dragged out from some corner of the building for decoration and forgotten. Daniel was at the bench, eyes half-closed posture, straight fingers moving with an ease she hadn't seen in anyone for years. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. He knew she was there. She could tell by the way his shoulders changed the slight lift of his head before the final chord faded into the shadows. "I thought you left," he said quietly. "I did," she replied. "Then you played." He rose slowly, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeves. "Bach." She nodded. "My choice tonight." "You rushed the transitions in the middle," he said matter-of-factly. "Your hands got stiff, too much tension in the shoulders. You were listening, you were shouting, Morgan, not playing." The words stung not because they were cruel, but because they were true. She stepped closer. "How did you know the piece I played at once?" he said, after a pause. "For someone who mattered a long time ago." "You're not just a janitor, are you?" she asked softly. "No more than you're just a CEO. We all hide in uniforms." There was something in the way he said it that made her stop breathing for a second. She wanted to ask him why he'd given it up, why he was here instead of in a concert hall. But she already knew. He had told her before life had handed him a different score. "Why are you here?" she asked instead. "Why spend your nights cleaning floors, polishing pianos, hiding backstage?" "Because life is a thief," he said without looking at her. "It takes what you love and leaves you with what you need to survive. And sometimes survival looks like pushing a mop." Her throat tightened. "That's a poetic way of saying you gave up." He turned to her, then his gaze steady. "I didn't give up. I gave everything. There's a difference." She saw it clearly now, the man who could play but had chosen not to. Not because he'd lost his gift, but because someone had mattered more. The thought lodged itself deep in her chest. You should have been on that stage tonight, she said. It wasn't my place, he replied. Then where is your place, she asked, taking a step closer. He hesitated, something flickering behind his eyes. Grief, maybe, or something older. My place is beside the person who needs me most. She didn't know what to say to that. For a moment, they just stood there, the dim light casting their shadows across the battered piano. She thought of all the prodigies her label had signed, all the gifted performers who chased fame like oxygen. And here was a man who had played something she couldn't forget, and then walked away like it was nothing, or maybe like it was everything. That night she couldn't sleep. Her penthouse felt too large, too silent. She found herself searching through old databases, concert programs, anything that might connect Daniel Cross to the music world she once knew. Aside from that single photo and a few brief mentions, it was as though he had vanished without a trace. The next evening, long after most of the office had gone home, she returned to the lobby. The piano sat untouched under the low lights. She lowered herself onto the bench, letting her hands hover above the keys. The first notes came out halting, fragile. She stumbled over rhythms, stopped twice, then started again. She was halfway through when another set of hands joined hers, not intruding, just filling in where she faltered. She didn't look up. She didn't need to. They played together, weaving a melody from half-remembered scales and uncertain harmonies. It was imperfect, raw, and somehow beautiful. When they finally stopped, she realized her chest felt lighter. Your left hand still tenses when you're uncertain, he said quietly. So does my heart, she replied. The two are usually connected. She turned to face him. What was that piece we just played? I don't know, he said. We made it up. Morgan smiled an unpracticed, unguarded smile she hadn't felt in years. Maybe we should finish it someday. Daniel's eyes softened. Maybe we already started. Morgan didn't plan to see him outside the building. She told herself their strange, wordless duet at the piano was just a moment, one that would fade like everything else in her overscheduled life. But 3 nights later, she was sitting across from Daniel Cross in a corner booth of a small diner 2 blocks from Orion Records, her blazer draped over the back of her chair, a plate of untouched fries between them. It had started as an accident. She'd stayed late again, reviewing contracts until the cleaning crew rolled in. Lily, his daughter, had been waiting near the lobby, coloring quietly while Daniel finished his shift. Morgan had never seen her before, brown curls escaping a loose braid knees swinging from the bench as she hummed to herself. When Daniel came back to get her, Lily had looked up and said, "Are you coming to dinner with us?" so matter-of-factly that Morgan almost laughed. "I don't," she began, but Lily had already slipped her small hand into hers and pulled her toward the door. And somehow Daniel hadn't stopped her. Now the 3 of them sat in a booth with mismatched cushions, Lily working her way through a grilled cheese while Daniel sipped black coffee. He wasn't a man who filled silences unnecessarily, but this one felt different. "She's got your eyes," Morgan said quietly. Daniel glanced at Lily, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "She's got her mother's stubbornness." Lily looked up at them, sensing she was part of the conversation, but not quite catching the meaning. "I'm not stubborn. I'm determined." Daniel chuckled, and Morgan felt the sound settle into her chest in a way she hadn't expected. After dinner, Lily insisted she wanted to show Morgan something important. Daniel didn't argue, just led them through narrow streets until they stopped in front of a modest apartment building. Inside the hallway smelled faintly of cinnamon and old books. The apartment itself was small but warm, the kind of place where nothing was expensive, but everything had a purpose. The upright piano sat beneath the living room window, sunlight pooling over its worn keys. Framed sheet music lined the wall above it, and a second-hand bookshelf sagged under the weight of classical scores and children's books. Lily ran ahead, pulling a thick folder from the shelf and carrying it to the couch. "These are Daddy's songs," she announced proudly. "Well, most of them. He says the rest are sleeping." Morgan raised an eyebrow. "Sleeping?" Daniel rubbed the back of his neck. "Unfinished ideas, melodies I never chased down." She took the folder, gently flipping to the first page. Notes spiraled across the staff like a thought half-formed, ending abruptly mid-phrase. "You wrote this a lifetime ago," he said. "It's beautiful," she murmured, tracing the final measure with her fingertip. "But it stops too soon." "So did a lot of things," he replied, his voice softer now. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, it felt charged, like the air between them had grown heavier without either of them moving. Lily climbed onto the bench and pressed one of the low keys, letting the note hum through the room. "That's my favorite one," she said. "When I was little, Daddy played at night when he thought I was asleep. I always listened." Morgan glanced at Daniel. His jaw was tight, but he didn't look away. "You play too?" she asked Lily. The girl grinned. "I try. My fingers are short." "They'll grow," Daniel said, adjusting her hand gently on the keys. "And they already know more than most people's hearts." Morgan sat beside them, watching as Lily stumbled through a simple arpeggio. Daniel didn't correct every mistake, only enough to guide her forward. His patience was something she wasn't used to seeing in a world that demanded perfection. When Lily was tucked into bed an hour later, Morgan found herself back at the piano. The unfinished score lay open in front of her, the pencil marks faint but still visible. Daniel sat beside her, the lamplight catching the faint lines of fatigue around his eyes. "Why this one?" she asked quietly. "Why not finish it?" He was silent for a long time. "Because I wrote it for someone I never got to say goodbye to. Finishing it felt final, like she'd really be gone." Morgan didn't ask who he meant. She didn't need to. Instead, she placed her hand on the keys, tentative but steady. Some songs aren't meant to be endings. They're meant to be open doors. He looked at her, something unreadable in his gaze. "You think I should finish it?" "No," she said softly. "I think we should." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, like an unspoken agreement, their hands found the keys. They began to fill in the blank bars, testing variations, layering sound upon sound, not perfectly, but truthfully. It wasn't about skill anymore. It was about presence. At one point, Daniel stopped. "You modulated early." "I know," she said with a small smile. "It felt right. You're breaking the rules." "Rules didn't raise a child alone," she replied. "Rules didn't hold you together when your world fell apart." He looked at her for a long moment, and then his lips curved into the smallest smile. "No, but music did." The clock struck midnight before either of them noticed. Daniel leaned back, stretching. "Lily's got an early appointment tomorrow." Morgan rose, lingering at the doorway. "Thank you for letting me see this part of your life." He walked her to the door but didn't open it right away. She turned, meeting his gaze. "I've been thinking about what you said about survival and sacrifice. I realized something." "What's that?" "You didn't just give something up," she said. "You gave yourself away piece by piece to build something bigger than you." He didn't speak for a moment. Then quietly, "Maybe it's time." She stepped into the hallway, the air cooler than it had been inside. "Good night, Mr. Cross." He smiled faintly. "Good night, Miss Pierce." The door closed between them, but the echo of the melody they'd begun still hummed in her head, soft and insistent, like it wasn't finished with either of them yet. Morgan had told herself she would let a few days pass before seeing him again, but life had other plans. It came in the form of a shaky phone video sent to her by a junior marketing assistant with the subject line, "You need to see this." She opened it, expecting some internal PR mishap, maybe a leaked artist contract. Instead, she saw herself sitting at the Orion lobby piano under low pendant lights, her hands drifting across the keys, Daniel beside her weaving in a quiet harmony. No words, no audience, just music. The caption read, "When the janitor plays a duet with the CEO and the piano remembers." The clip was only 38 seconds long, shot through the glass wall of the security booth. But the intimacy was undeniable. She could almost feel the stillness in the room, the way their eyes had met for just a moment before they returned to the keys. Her phone buzzed again. Jennifer, her assistant. It's circulating through internal Slack threads, social media. "Even Reddit has a thread about it," she said, her voice low and cautious. Morgan forced her tone to stay even. "How many views?" "Over 200,000 from private shares alone. The algorithm picked it up this morning." And the comments, Jennifer hesitated. Some supportive, most speculative. Office gossip, power dynamics. "You know how these things go." Morgan set the phone down, the weight of it pressing into her palm. "Does the board know they've called 6 times?" Richard left a message asking for a frank conversation tonight. By the time she found Daniel, the video had already reached him. He was in the staff stairwell, wiping down handrails with practiced precision. He didn't look up when she walked in. "I was wondering when you'd come," he said. She held up her phone. "It's everywhere." "I know, you knew someone recorded us. I found out this morning. Someone in payroll winked at me and said, 'Nice duet, maestro.' I thought he was joking." "This isn't funny, Daniel," she said sharply. "No, it's not." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "They're turning this into something it's not. Turning you into something you're not. They're saying you're using me. Or that I'm manipulating you. That you're some PR project I took on to fix my public image." He finally met her eyes. "And what do you think it is?" "I think," she faltered, her throat tightening. "I think it's real. Whatever this is, it's the most honest thing I've touched in years." His gaze held hers, searching for something. "Then why do you look like you're already running from it?" "Because I know how this ends," she admitted. "Tell me. They'll drag my name through the mud, question my judgment, my leadership, everything I've built." "You think I don't know how that feels?" He said, his voice sharpening. "I gave up the only thing I was ever praised for. I vanished so my daughter could breathe. You think I don't know what it means to watch your life dissolve?" She looked away. "I didn't ask for this." "No," he said quietly, "but you played for it. You showed up for it, and now you want to hide. I'm trying to protect you." "No," he replied. "You're trying to protect your image, and you're using me as the reason to retreat." The words landed like a slap. He didn't flinch. "When was the last time you stayed in something messy?" "Morgan," he asked. "Something you couldn't script, couldn't schedule, couldn't control." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. "That's what I thought he said." She wrapped her arms around herself like armor. "You have no idea the pressure I'm under." "You're right," he said. "I just know what it feels like to be left standing when someone walks away." Her voice was quieter now. "Is that what you think I'll do?" "I don't think it," he said. "I see it." The next morning, the trade headlines hit Power Ballad, or Power Imbalance. Orion Records CEO Morgan Pierce caught an intimate moment with Janitor. Inside headquarters, whispers followed her down every hallway. She didn't need to hear the words to know their shape. By 4 o'clock, she was in the boardroom 20 minutes early for the meeting she knew would decide everything. The faces around the table were familiar, but their expressions had hardened into polite masks. Richard Quinn, her uncle and the board's chairman, entered last. "We need to address the optics," he said without preamble. "We'll issue a statement clarifying your relationship with Mr. Cross as non-romantic and outline our zero-tolerance policy moving forward." She met his gaze. "It is romantic." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. "I'm not going to lie to make you comfortable," she continued. "I sat at that piano because I felt something real. I'm not ashamed of it." "This could cost the company millions," Richard warned. "Then maybe we should ask why we've built something so fragile that a single moment of humanity can shake it." "You're making a mistake," he said. "No," she said quietly. "For once, I'm choosing something else." That night, she walked out of the building alone. No entourage, no press statement, just her in the city air. Her phone buzzed a message from Daniel. "We lost something today, didn't we? Or maybe we finally stopped pretending we never had it." Her reply came before she could second-guess it. "I don't want to lose you." His response was instant. "Then don't." But when she knocked on his apartment door the next evening, there was no answer. A neighbor poked her head out, curious. "He left a few hours ago. Said something about the hospital." Morgan didn't wait for details. For the first time in years, the woman who had built an empire ran. The hospital's fluorescent lights felt harsher than usual, buzzing faintly overhead as Morgan pushed through the double doors of the pediatric wing. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic, and something else, fear maybe, or the way time itself seemed to hold its breath in places like this. Room 312's door was cracked. She paused, hearing nothing but the steady beep of a heart monitor, then eased it open. Daniel was seated beside the bed, his hand wrapped protectively around a much smaller one. Lily lay pale and still against the white sheets, her chest rising with shallow effort. Thin tubes framed her face, and a stuffed bear rested under her arm. Daniel's other hand covered his eyes. his shoulders tight with the kind of tension that didn't come from hours. It came from years. "Daniel," she said softly. He looked up. His face was hollowed, his voice almost unrecognizable. "How did you know I was here?" "Your neighbor," she replied. "You didn't answer my text." "Sorry," he murmured. His gaze fell back to Lily. Morgan stepped closer, her throat tightening at the sight of the little girl. "How is she critical?" he whispered. The attack hit harder than usual. Her oxygen dropped so fast they had to intubate before I could even process what was happening. "Is she awake?" She was. She kept asking for the song, the one we were writing together. His voice cracked. "I promised I'd finish it for her, but I... He swallowed hard. "I couldn't." Morgan reached for his hand, her own fingers cold. "Then we'll finish it now." He looked at her, tears threatening but refusing to fall. "You think she'll hear us?" "I think love travels," she said, "even through glass and wires and beeping machines, especially then." They sat side by side, no piano between them, just Lily's blanket beneath their hands. They tapped the rhythm softly into the fabric, humming the melody they'd been building together, Daniel's low harmony weaving around her softer thread. The hospital seemed to fade until there was nothing left but the two of them and the little girl lying between them. Halfway through, Daniel's voice, rusty from years of silence, began to sing. The sound was rough, but it carried a truth that made Morgan's eyes sting. She joined him without thinking, their voices finding each other in the small, sterile room. When they finished, there was no applause, no audience, just the faintest twitch of Lily's fingers against Daniel's palm. She heard as Morgan whispered, her lips trembling into a smile. A few hours later, a doctor came in, expression measured but kind. "Her vitals are stabilizing. The medication is helping, but this isn't sustainable long term. She'll need more advanced treatment." "Likely out of state." Daniel straightened. "How long do we have?" "A few weeks, maybe less, if another episode hits before her system recovers. You should prepare." When the door closed, the silence that followed felt heavier than any words could fill. Daniel leaned against the wall, his voice low and raw. "I can't afford Boston. I can't even afford a second ER visit." Morgan stepped forward. "Then let me help." "I can't ask you for that." "You didn't ask," she said. "I'm offering." His eyes searched hers, pain flickering in every line of his face. "Do you know what it feels like to have your dignity measured in invoices?" She reached up her hand, brushing his cheek. "Do you know what it feels like to have money and still feel useless?" That stopped him. "I've sat in boardrooms making million-dollar decisions while my soul begged for something real." She continued softly. "Don't rob me of the chance to finally give something that matters." He didn't answer with words. Instead, he pulled her into an embrace, fierce, silent, uncalculated. Not romantic in that moment, just human. Two people holding each other at the edges of fear. The next day, Morgan cleared her schedule without hesitation. She called every contact she had in pediatric cardiology, leaned on old favors, and donated anonymously to the hospital foundation to fast-track Lily's transfer. But she didn't just sign checks. She sat with Lily, told her stories about women who wore crowns and fought dragons, read her music notes like fairy tales, and brought coloring books and noise-canceling headphones so the constant beeping wouldn't wear her down. Slowly, the room began to smell less like fear and more like crayons paper, and the faint trace of cinnamon from the tea Daniel always brewed in the corner. 3 days later, the call came. Lily was approved for transport to Boston Cardiac Center. The specialist team would take her within the week. That evening, Morgan returned to Orion Records for the last time. The board had already made their decision. They called it a mutually agreed transition. She called it the price of honesty. Her office, once a fortress of ambition, felt strangely hollow as she packed a single box, some framed photos, a worn leather notebook, and tucked under her arm Daniel's old composition folder. Jennifer appeared in the doorway holding a manila envelope. "These came in the mail today." Morgan frowned. "What is it, fan letters?" "From people who saw the video." She hesitated before opening the envelope. The letters were handwritten, some typed, some scribbled on scraps of paper. They didn't mock. They didn't speculate. They spoke about how the music had made them feel again, about memories of parents long gone, about holding on to something fragile and worth loving. Morgan smiled faintly. "Then maybe I finally did something worth the noise." She left the building without fanfare, without a speech. Just a woman with a box in one hand and someone else's unfinished song in the other. The next time she saw Daniel, they were standing outside the ambulance that would take Lily to Boston. Lily looked small in her coat, but her smile was steady, her eyes bright. "Miss Morgan," she said, tugging on her sleeve, "will you come visit me after I get my new heart?" Morgan knelt, looking her in the eye. "I'll be there the day it starts to beat." Lily leaned closer, whispering, "Bring the music." Daniel stood a few feet away watching the exchange. His eyes were misted, but his posture was proud. "Thank you," he said quietly when Morgan joined him. "You're welcome," she replied. "But I didn't save her. You did. Every day. You showed up when it was hard. That's what love looks like." He looked at her for a long moment. "You saved me." They stood there together until the ambulance doors closed, the sirens staying mercifully silent as the vehicle pulled away. Neither of them moved for a while, the hum of the street fading into something else entirely, an unspoken melody that neither wanted to see end. The ambulance was gone, swallowed by the city's gray streets, but Morgan stayed rooted to the spot long after it disappeared. Daniel hadn't moved either, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular. The air between them was heavy, but not empty like the pause between two movements of a song. She wanted to say something to promise him everything would be all right, but she had spent enough of her life dressing fear in false certainty. Instead, she simply asked, "Where will you be staying in Boston?" "A small place near the hospital," he said. "Short-term rental." "Just a bed, a kitchenette." "It's all I need, all you need," she echoed, though she knew he didn't mean it. They walked together in silence, their steps falling into an unplanned rhythm. By the time they reached the corner, the winter wind had found its way between them, but neither seemed in a hurry to part. In the days that followed, Morgan kept in touch with him more than she expected. She sent him updates from her contacts at the hospital, arranged for the first month's rent on his Boston apartment without telling him, and even had groceries delivered to the address he gave her just in case you forget to eat. He protested, of course, but she brushed it off every time. One evening, as the week drew to a close, she stopped by his apartment to drop off Lily's forgotten sketchbook. The hallway smelled faintly of cinnamon again, and she could hear the low hum of a kettle from inside. When he opened the door, there was something softer in his expression than she'd seen before. Not relief exactly, but a quiet gratitude that made her chest tighten. "You didn't have to come all the way here for that," he said, taking the sketchbook from her hand. "I wanted to," she replied. Lily appeared from the living room wearing a sweatshirt that looked 2 sizes too big a smile lighting her face despite the fatigue lingering in her eyes. "You came back," she exclaimed, wrapping her arms around Morgan's waist. Morgan laughed and hugged her back. "Of course I did. You have to show me the song title you picked." Lily dashed off to fetch a folded piece of paper, then returned with the kind of seriousness only a child could manage. She opened it to reveal bold, colorful letters, "The Song That Never Sleeps." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Her naming skills are dramatic." "No," Morgan said, smiling. "She understands something most composers forget, that real music doesn't end when the notes stop." They gathered around the piano again, this time in daylight. Lily climbed onto the bench, her posture surprisingly poised, fingers resting lightly on the keys. Daniel adjusted her wrist with the care of a craftsman, his voice low as he asked, "Ready?" She nodded and began, her left hand carrying a rhythm slightly off the expected pattern. Morgan tilted her head. "You hear that? She's playing in 3s, not 4s. Lily gave a small shrug. "It's just there if you listen with your eyes closed." Daniel grinned. "She's got what the teachers used to call an absolute ear, knows when a note is even a quarter tone sharp." Morgan crossed her arms, watching the little girl work through a broken arpeggio like she was unlocking a map only she could see. "You didn't tell me she was gifted." "She's not a trophy," Daniel said. "She's just Lily." Morgan met his eyes. "That's the most beautiful thing a parent can say." After practice, Lily curled up on the couch with a sketch pad drawing pianos with wings and music notes shaped like hearts. One of the figures was a woman with flowing red hair wearing a crown. Across the top in large letters it read, "Queen Morgan." Morgan laughed when she saw it. "I've never been royalty before." "You wear high heels like a queen," Lily said simply. Daniel came in with 2 mugs of tea, setting them down with a quiet smile. "She only calls people queen when they make her feel safe." Morgan blinked. That's a high compliment. She doesn't say it often, he said. His voice was even, but there was a shadow behind it. Lily looked up from her drawing. I used to call Mommy that too. The room went still not awkward, but reverent. Morgan sat beside her and brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. She sounds like someone who left a lot of love behind. She did, Daniel said from the doorway. His voice wasn't broken, but there was an ache in it softened only by time. Later, when Lily went to her room for a nap, Morgan wandered to the bookshelf. Her fingers traced worn bindings, old concert programs, photographs of park days and birthday cakes. One book caught her attention, a faded journal with a red ribbon marking the middle. She opened it to find pages of music, but also words. Lyrics raw and unpolished with notes scribbled in the margins. A single phrase repeated again and again in different corners of the pages. What we lose becomes what we love deeper. You wrote lyrics too, she said, turning toward him. Daniel, standing by the kitchen counter, nodded without looking up. You should finish these, she urged. I wrote them when Sarah was in the hospital, he said, his voice low. I couldn't fix her body, but I tried to give her a lullaby strong enough to stay behind. Morgan's throat tightened. Did you ever sing it to Lily once? She cried. Said it sounded like goodbye. Morgan closed the journal gently. Maybe now it could sound like home instead. He didn't answer right away. The kettle whistled softly, steam curling into the air between them. Finally, he said, She's getting worse. More attacks lately. Shorter breath. Her color fades faster. The doctors are talking about options, but I can't afford them. Morgan didn't reach for her checkbook. She didn't launch into solutions. She stepped closer and said, Then let me sit with you in the middle of that fear. You shouldn't have to carry this alone. He looked at her like he didn't quite know what to do with the words. I'm not used to people standing still when things get hard. Then I'll be the first, she whispered. When she finally left that night, Lily stirred from her nap just enough to whisper, Will you play that half-finished song again tomorrow? The one Daddy started. Morgan smiled. Of course. As she closed the apartment door behind her, the echo of those words stayed with her. Not because of the music, but because of what Lily had said before slipping back into sleep, something Morgan didn't share with Daniel yet.